there, I'm Gabby. Welcome to another episode of the Happier Life Project, brought to you by free mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self, in partnership with the Priory Healthcare. Today's episode is for those of you who have someone in your life that you love who is battling with addiction. Addiction is defined as not having control over doing, taking, or using something to the point where it could be harmful to you. Addiction, as you know, comes in many forms, and today we're not bringing the magnifying glass down to one specific type. We're looking more openly and broadly at addiction and the impact that has on a person's loved ones. Living with an addicted loved one isn't just frustrating. The constant worry and stress over someone's addictive behaviour can really take its toll both mentally and physically on friends and family members. Your life is consumed by their problems. You may neglect your own self-care. You worry constantly. One of the most profound ways addiction affects the entire family is the higher risk of abuse. Now, regular listeners to this podcast will know I do like to do my research and see what data I can dig up. I found this. Research shows that loved ones of, taking alcoholics as an example, are at risk for trauma, misplaced anger towards others, depression, anxiety, insomnia, poor self-care, and substance abuse. And if you have children, they're also at risk for problems from living with an alcoholic. The same review of research found that children of alcoholics are at risk for behavioural problems, relationship issues, drug and alcohol abuse, suicidal thoughts, and mental health issues like depression and anxiety. When it comes to the impact of addiction on mental health in a relationship, the partner with the addiction may experience increased anxiety and depression, whilst the other partner may feel helpless and overwhelmed by the situation. As I said to today's guest, nobody wins. However, this podcast isn't to depress you further. It's hopefully going to give you some hope and advice on how to take care of yourself and set healthy boundaries whilst loving someone who is suffering at the hands of addiction. And there is no better, kinder and more insightful guest to help us with this topic than Taner Hassan, an addiction specialist who has a wealth of experience working with substance misuse addiction, sex addiction, porn addiction and alcohol addiction for over 15 years. Taner has worked with the NHS, community drug and alcohol services, addiction and mental health rehabs, and works not only with the person in addiction, but also with the family members in addiction. Taner was really fantastic to talk to. He spoke sensitively and compassionately regarding all parties involved. So, ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Taner Hassan, welcome to the Happier Life Project.
Thanks for having me.
To do a quick summarisation, you are a counsellor, psychotherapist and addiction expert. You're a qualified unconscious mind therapist, UMT practitioner, working with the unconscious feelings and emotions. And I couldn't help but think that's probably getting to the root of quite a lot of addictions. Would I be right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm a bit greedy. So, when I trained, I wanted to train in everything. So obviously being a counsellor and psychotherapist, working very much with the cognitive functions and what you want to do about it now and here and now, going back to the past. But the unconscious mind therapy really focuses on the unconscious and literally the out of awareness, the unspoken. And so the body remembers. So a lot of that removal work can take place in the unconscious mind therapy space, because it's not really interested in the cognition, the thought process. It's more about the feelings. It's going straight into sort of neuroassociation, and that kind of work. So I don't know, for example, everyone's template's different. I gave you a bunch of tulips. You get really excited because it reminds you of your nan. We used to go around her house on a Sunday lunch, and you start thinking about roast lamb, and that's your neuroassociation. So your association to tulips is that memory. The body creates that feeling. The brain instantly feels like it's back there in that moment, thus feeling and having those thought processes of that time. So therefore, it's a good experience. I could give it to your neighbor down the road, and those tulips represent when her nan died. So the template can be completely different. So neuroassociation is really important. We must really give neuroassociation a lot more respect than we realize. It's more powerful. The body never forgets. Even if your mind forgets, the body never forgets. And that's why working with trauma, anxiety, especially, and phobias is really, really good space for that removal work. Because sometimes psychotherapy can really just keep re-traumatizing the people. There's absolutely the space to talk, but sometimes it's like, yeah, that's great, I keep talking about it, but I need to remove this stuff. So that's where I've learned some other skills and sort of hypnotherapy skills and lots of different bits and pieces in the toolkit that you can basically chuck at every client, because everyone's different, and that's pretty much how it works.
Wow. So you could basically, could you rewrite the narrative of what a tulip means to you, if we stick with that example? Is that it, like if it's a traumatic thing?
Yeah.
The reason I ask is I'm thinking of, for me, music and a song. Like there's a certain artist in particular that me and my family just cannot listen to because it reminds us of a traumatic time where that artist was played a lot, and it just makes us cower. And anytime it comes on anywhere, we all kind of, and nobody can stay on the dance floor. So is that the sort of stuff that you could kind of help?
100%. In fact, sideline to this.
Rewrite.
Absolutely, rewrite. Sideline to this. If that's really a thing that you would like to get rid of, I would happily do that with you. I could easily do that. It would take me half an hour of your time, and I could remove it. You see, the thing is, it's about, the way that the brain works is a lot of this is to do with the brain. Once the brain accepts something as silly and ridiculous, it can no longer be afraid of it. That's a fact. And that's a really important notion. Once the brain accepts something as silly and ridiculous, it is no longer afraid of it. So if I ran at you with a big Timmy Mallet rubber hammer, you'd probably laugh, right? Because your brain's no threat and no anxiety there. You know, it's as silly and ridiculous, no longer afraid of it. So you're not afraid of it. I ran it with a real hammer, you're going to be a bit more concerned, right? The brain kicks in and thinks, what's his motive there? And everything starts kicking in. So the aim here is to break, as you said, break that association and rechange that association. And that's absolutely right. And so there are a few techniques you can use for that. The trauma timeline is a really good way of doing that. So when you look at the trauma timeline using unconscious mind therapy, it's really about going back through visualization. So a lot of it's about visualization. Now, you may have heard us say the law of attraction, for example, and I think it gets a lot of bad press. I think a lot of people don't really understand. It sounds a bit woo-woo, and you know what you put out to the universe, and the universe suddenly goes, yeah, here you are, have it. And that's not how it really works. You know, it's about you changing the filter within your brain, which is the reticular activating system. And so that is your filter. We need it. Without it, the brain pops. You can't take everything in equal measure. And so what you think about, you become. What you become, you think about the most, is so true. So if you wake up in the morning saying, I don't feel loved, your brain's going to look for information all day that confirms you're not loved. Look, the neighbor didn't say hello to me. My wife didn't say, I love you on the way out. My mum hasn't said, you know, all these things, you're looking for pieces of evidence all day that confirms that belief. And so that's about retraining those neural pathways, retraining the brain to work on a different filter. So by doing that with a timeline, we use visualization, going back to key moments that comes up. You know, think about, feel how you feel, see what you see, you know, colors, taste, smells, like really take you there. And you close your eyes for that process, because when you close your eyes, you literally turn off all of your senses. It's powerful stuff. It's amazing. I mean, I just absolutely love it. When you get to that very moment, you process those feelings, and then you do some other work where you pull them out. Let's say when you, I don't know, that event you're talking about, let's say you was 8 years old when that occurred. So I'd hear that, would get you there, and you as an adult, I'd get you to talk to your 8-year-old self. What would you like, useful information would you like to say? Swap you over and get you to be the 8-year-old. What's it like to receive that information? And we keep going back and forth until we feel that work is done. And then we get you to step aside and reframe as if, you know, what it would be like if that hadn't happened to you. Because what happens is it's limiting beliefs. Yeah, limiting beliefs. It's really easy. If someone just said to you, I'll just let it go. It doesn't land. What you have to do is have to go through that process that the body can accept it to move forward. And so it's stopping you from moving forward. So when we look at visualization, what would it be like when you are 8? You're creating this whole new timeline. It's like, well, now I'm sitting at the front of the class, and what you're doing? Well, I'm engaging with my peers. Okay, what's that going to do for you when you move forward? Well, suddenly I'm now qualifying. I'm going to university, and now what? And so you're working with the future, and it shows you that you don't have to be held back. We can't change that past, but you don't have to be held back by that. And through this process, we do some more little tools and techniques, and it really helps shift the energy and helps you really accept it. It's got a lot of similarities to EMDR.
Okay.
But I'm not an EMDR therapist. I'd love to be one, but that's next on the list. So I don't know if I've just fried your noodle with all that information, but I'm very passionate about it.
I'm letting it marinate, and I'm kind of thinking about, a couple of things really. One is through the lens of the theme of this episode, which is looking at addiction not from the perspective of the addict, but from a loved one that is watching this happen to somebody close to them, and how their mental health is affected. So sometimes I think we can't rewrite something traumatic, can we? I'm thinking from their perspective, and then maybe a song is a trigger. But then I also think, I know you work with a lot of addicts, but with the work that you've just described, that probably does have a place in terms of working with people that have gone through a traumatic time because of, they've been caught in the crossfire of somebody they love having addiction issues.
Absolutely. I work with both. I never thought I would, actually. I always thought I was very much focused on the presenting client would happen to be someone who is addicted to a substance, or no matter what the addiction was. But then obviously, because that was my core background at that time, obviously working within community drug and alcohol services and private services before I trained as a psychotherapist. But I also realized that I liked other areas such as anxiety, phobias, OCD, personality disorder, whatever it might be. But then I found that there would be a lot of partners inquiring. My husband, my wife, my girlfriend, they're going through this. I'm not sure if they're ready for help, but I'm lost. And I always say, in the end, it's really hard to determine who the addict actually is in a relationship, in the family unit, because both parties feel hopeless. Both parties feel, what's the point? There's the boundaries are all gone. And that's why you'll find there's a lot more family programs now, a lot of self-help groups for families, because they recognize that addiction really is like paint stripper. It goes through families. Those days are long gone where people think it's just the person that's suffering. And actually, the more people talk about it, the more stories that there are that really realize that actually it affects everybody. It really does, because emotionally you feel it. If you've got your loved one and something's wrong with them, how many times do we say to our partner, or a friend, you all right? Yeah, I'm all right. What's going on for you? No, nothing. But you've picked up on the energy that something isn't right. And so imagine on top of that, it's because there is something darker, such as addiction, or, the acting out, they're trying to hide it, they're in denial of it, all these kind of things. You just feel it. We're receptive, we're sensitive people. We can feel the energy isn't right. That's why we check. Are you all right? You seem a bit quiet today. These are the lighter end stuff, but there are much more, much more prominent signs and symptoms. And I think, we just need to keep having the conversation, and that's really it. Just keep having the conversation, because there are a lot of people that won't come forward and say, actually, I've got something going on, because it's a shame-based illness. I do believe it's an illness, and it's shame-based. So no one's going to go, yes, actually, I'm an alcoholic. Been wanting to tell you that for years. Some people might, get to that point. But the more support there are for families and loved ones and friends and carers out there, and that has increased. There's lots of charities and lots of private, there's lots of different support systems out there now. And I think that's really, really great, because we now know it's not just the individual, it affects everybody around them. And so many times I have seen this, especially working in private treatment, is you might have a loved one that then gets sober and gets clean. And then the partner almost feels like, well, I don't know what my role is anymore, because I've spent most of my years picking up the pieces of X.
Right.
And now X seems to self-actualize and move forward in their life. And I'm still outside looking in. Where am I? And that's a really good point, especially if certain people go down a recovery program. a particular self-help program of looking at self, and they thrive. If they follow that program, they thrive. But they have to remember it's a bridge to normal living. And sometimes the loved one can still feel on the outside looking in. So that's why that repair work is really important. And those boundaries are really important to establish it. And I've seen some real great work occur in that regard. But there are also loved ones that don't understand what it's like. And that's usually the first thing. I don't understand. And of course, we don't know what we don't know. And as I said to you when we first connected, that sometimes it's like, I've explained it, it's not the same, but it's like being in love. Have you been in love before yourself?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Okay, so that's a session in itself. We'll pick up offline.
That's a whole other
yes,
episode,
I have.
Taner.
Yes, I have, Taner. Yes, I have. All right, note to self. We'll come back to that. And and I say it's like being in love. So when you're in love, if someone says to you, "Oh no, you can't see that person, you can't be around that person," you'll do anything you can to get that love and to have that love. So all the unacceptable becomes acceptable. And though it's not the same, it gives you an inkling of those who do not understand addiction, what that might be like, and that gives them a little bit of an insight. But that's just an example.
Well, I'm a bit reassured you saying there's more support out there for the network, because when I sort of looked into it, then I didn't see, when I was doing my research for this episode, I didn't find enough people coming forward sharing their stories. It seemed like it from the perspective of the loved one. So yeah, that is, that's what inspired me as well to do this episode, because just my own personal experience with addiction in the family, which still, and honestly, I just, at this point, I think it's always going to be there. I don't know if that's the right thing to say or not, but that's, I think, how most of my family feel. And we just don't know what to do. Ultimately, it does come down to the person, right, who has the addiction to decide. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of people don't want to give whatever it is up and don't ever get to that point. Please tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, you're not wrong. There will be people like that, but there'll also be people that don't know what it looks like. We're very, as human beings, we can adapt. And as strange as it sounds, people can become familiar with the pain. It doesn't have to be addiction. People staying in relationships that they know are toxic and they shouldn't be in. Bet the devil sometimes, right? What does it look like if I go right? Well, I've never gone right. I've always gone left, and I know what waits for me left. It's more pain, but I got used to it, and that's what I'm used to. And it might be linked for what I've learned in previous behavior in my relationships in the past, or I don't feel I'm good enough, etc., and therefore this is what I deserve. But in terms of the change, it's really hard, and everyone's viewpoint is different, right? So it might be very painful to look at. To look at ourselves and to reflect isn't really in the public domain as a regular thing. That's the stuff we should be teaching kids in school, not what the capital of France is. You can ask Google for them for that. It's like teach them how to budget, teach them how to deal with rejection, teach them how to deal with overwhelming emotions and emotional regulation, those kind of things. But, I think people will experience so much pain, for sure, in any destructive system that changes the way you feel, no matter what it will be. But the unknown is frightening for some. It's terrifying. What does that look like? I don't know. So there is that reluctance to go into, well, what does recovery really look like? A lot of people will say, well, does that mean I'm going to be boring? Because all my life is centered around the pub, or it's always centered around hosting, or whatever it's going to be. And it's like already that association. And it's like, well, actually, if we're really honest, when were you the life and the soul of the party? When did you really function perfectly fine? Actually, chaos erupted at some point for you to even question it. So it gets worse, but we almost go back to the good times and the glamorizing of when it was all right. And therefore, one end of the scale to the other must be completely boring. Well, you've got alcohol-free markets out there, a bit controversial, I know, but, the alcohol-free market's taken by storm. It's incredible, really. Like literally alcohol-free drinks are out there and things, and there are people that have got taste for that. It's not just people who are alcoholics. There are people who have realized that actually I'm hitting a bit of the alcohol too much and I'd like a change. So it is definitely becoming more popular, I think, as well, the alcohol-free drinks. I know I'm going off topic slightly.
Does that satisfy the craving, though? It's like, your nicotine-free vapes and stuff, your alcohol-free whatever's, does that satisfy that overwhelming desire for whichever substance?
Well, let's say alcohol, for example. What we're actually craving in the alcohol is the sugar. So in the early days, what you tell people is pints of lemonade, Coca-Cola, whatever you're going to drink, that takes the edge off.
That's why so many former alcoholics have sugar addictions, isn't it?
Absolutely
I have
right.
read that.
Absolutely. It's the sugar you're craving. But you see, where there are people in the field, they'll all have an opinion. People in sort of self-help support groups, therapists within rehabilitation services and local services, they'll have an opinion on whether or not, if you are an alcoholic in recovery, should you or should you not be drinking alcohol free. I always say question the motive, keep it really simple. There are same people that say that with medication. There will be people around, oh no, you need to come off your mental health medication and then you'll be really clean. Again, everyone will have an opinion. I always say, what is the motive? If you are taking a substance to change the way that you feel, question the motive. If that's what you're doing, then it's probably not a good thing. If you're having a alcohol beer because you want to be normal, then it's probably not the way for you. If you're doing it because you're missing the beer and all that, probably not a good idea. If you're doing it because you actually enjoy the taste and it's refreshing, you don't want to keep drinking lemonade or Coca-Cola, fine, that's up to you. So I think it's an individual journey. I don't think any professional can actually really say whether you should or you shouldn't. I think that's an experiential thing, and I think everyone is different. Though there are some reports to say that it responds to certain receptors within the brain. I'm not completely au fait with that notion at this stage, but I have met a therapist that said there's something, it does something to the brain that almost replicates the same sort of feeling. So I'm not sure yet, but more research, I guess, and more conversations, I guess. But I think it's an individual choice, but always question the motive.
There are so many things when I did go down a bit of a rabbit hole here when I was looking at types of addictions. I've got a big list here: alcohol, drugs, prescription drugs, nicotine. Vaping, I think, is actually more addictive than cigarettes. I vaped previously and I still crave it now more than ever I did a cigarette.
Was it you craving the vape more? Is it the flavoring? Is it the flavor you miss? The taste?
Yeah, it could be a bit of the whole. I always went for the menthol one because I used to smoke menthol cigarettes.
Yeah, it's harder to stop.
So, yeah, that, and also it's that pausing time, isn't it, that cigarettes give you, that sort of stop and do something with your hands. I guess that was.
Yep.
But with a vape, I would do it more because you didn't need to go outside or whatever.
You don't smell. Hand, right? So, you can do it lying in bed.
Yeah.
You can do it any minute.
Yeah.
And no one will go, "Are you smoking?" No. Relive the taste.
Used to get terrible headaches from it as well.
Absolutely.
From doing it too much.
It's got propranolol glycol or propylene glycol, which is, I can't say the name, but that's the flavoring. But that's an irritant. A lot of people don't realize. So some people are allergic to that. It's an irritant.
Oh God.
Yeah. But so you're right. So there is that, but it's less addictive than cigarettes.
Is it?
Believe it or not. I mean, it's out on the news at the moment. There is some conversations because of all the chemicals that are in it, in the cigarettes are more, which makes it more what you crave. For example, people that used to smoke cannabis, right? They'd say, "Oh, the cravings. It's not really actually the weed sometimes that they're craving. It's the nicotine, and all the other bits and pieces and the chemicals within the cigarette is what they were craving if they smoked it with a cigarette in it. So you get them to change it into tobacco or something like that. But at the moment, they're saying that it is still a good stepping stone to stop. But then there was someone I was speaking to who, I think there are some reports that when you vape, it almost responds in the same way as smoking crack cocaine. And so it creates that moreish kind of addictive way of puffing on it, which I thought was quite interesting. We're learning more all the time. But yes, you're right. So prescription medication, alcohol, drugs, gambling.
Shopping.
What else you got? Shopping,
sex, porn, love, food, sugar, of course, exercise, work. How many workaholics do you know? Caffeine, tattoos, social media, tanning.
I don't have that problem.
Yes. Compulsive hair pulling, skin picking, plastic surgery, and gaming. So there's a very broad kind of mix, isn't there? Is there like a common thing in the brain though? I wonder, is there like, you get some people that will say things like, oh, I've got, and I'm going to air quote, an addictive personality.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? Is there such a thing?
I think so. Absolutely. I think anything, when you determine what that is, anything to change the way that you feel. As human beings, we want to feel good all the time, do we not? It's just not reality, but we do. We want to feel good all the time. We want to connect. We want to do all these things. All we ever really want is love and to be loved. And if we go down to the old primitive instincts, biologically, we're meant to connect. We are meant to, have those healthy attachment styles because it meant survival. It meant we weren't going to be food. So, that's from a biological level, right down into that survival. And so we need each other. We need people. But actually, to self-soothe and to really be successful, if every child on the planet was told that they are enough and that they are loved, every single one of us, without fail, and we believed it because we were shown it, we'll be thriving. But it's when there is a distortion in that, when, environmental, social, all these other things kick in that sort of create limiting beliefs and get in the way of that. They can play a part. I don't think, because there are people who would have experienced either a single trauma or continual trauma, and addiction seems to be the pathway. And, a lot of people will relate to that. But there are people that haven't experienced that grew up in a really great, loving household and whatnot. So then the question comes, well, then how does that materialize? And I think there are always those conversations. My belief is that the external isn't the factor, it's a contributing factor. I think they won't help, but actually when you look at what's going on within the brain, and we don't talk about it enough around the brain, we always talk about the illness and kind of the trauma base and whatnot, but there are more people coming forward and saying that's not what's happened. But actually it's to do with I'm going to sound a bit sciencey for a moment, it's all to do with the frontal cortex speaks to the midbrain, right? So imagine your frontal cortex is really like your guide, your sense of reason. It's like, well, don't jump off that cliff because I think you might fall and hurt yourself. And the midbrain goes, oh, okay, yeah, but what if we put a parachute on? Maybe frontal cortex says, well, maybe that might be a good idea. Yeah, all right, let's do that. So it's the guide, and we talk, and they keep communicating. And what happens with addiction, at some point, the frontal cortex is muted. It's speaking to the midbrain, but midbrain can't hear it. It's like it's just on mute. And so what happens is it needs to survive. The brain's job is to survive. That's all its job is to do, is keep you alive. And so it then starts to communicate with the pleasure sensor. And eventually, I'm feeling discontented. I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. Pleasure, I feel better. Oh, it's coming again. Pleasure, feel better. Pleasure, feel better. So pleasure in the end becomes survival. So survival and pleasure equal the same thing. And that's really interesting. That's how the brain interprets. And they did this test with mice, and the mice would touch the electrodes and get electric shock for the pleasure, for the drugs, until they died. So what was going on in the brain is it was pleasure, I'll be all right, survival, until they eventually died. And so actually, this is where the solution here is time. So time is what the healer is. They say it, the cliche, time is a healer, but actually time really is the only way. And at some point when you're not activating the pleasure sensor, when you're not acting out all of the time, and you take that abstinence approach and you identify your triggers, get instilled hope, see other people go through it and living in the solution, and it gives you that hope. The more you then change those neural pathways in your brain, doing other activities and coping mechanisms and learning new coping mechanisms, you eventually start to heal in that time. And then the midbrain can hear the frontal cortex again, and then it can communicate. And so that's really what's happening on the brain level as well. But it doesn't help when, remember, the brain is looking for survival. So if there's been a sexual trauma, there's been abandonment, someone that's been moved from house to house, or any other kind of thing, that's going to be painful. The interpretation of that's going to be painful, and therefore they want to survive. So of course the pleasure sensor is going to change the way that we feel, and that's going to be so it can obviously not help in those situations.
Yeah.
And that's a really good conversation to have, because some people say, am I born with it? Did I catch it? Did I inherit it? Did I learn it? And I think that really kind of answers it all, really. I think all of it plays a contributing factor. I don't think there's a definitive answer. Maybe I'm wrong, but look, I'm not a doctor. And I know you said I'm an expert, but I'm a specialist, and I appreciate the big up as an expert, but I class myself as a specialist because I don't know absolutely everything, and I'm still open to learn. I love learning it, and I'm learning more all the time. So I think I never dismiss anything, and I think it's still an open conversation. But a lot of people have had existential stuff happen to them and interpret, and it creates the coping mechanism. But there are others that haven't had that trauma and have still gone down that route.
When you're in it, do you even realise how much destruction you are causing and pain to the people around you?
Only the individual can tell you that, because everyone's experience is different. But what I can tell you is, yes, to a degree. Of course, some people can be in denial.
Yeah.
Looking in the mirror, no, I'm okay. I'm all right. No one knows. It's all right. It's okay. Justification, denial. Or what can also continue the behavior is the fact that there is that shame, that they are fully aware how much pain it's causing, and that guilt and that shame, it's so damaging. It's just like, this is awful. So I don't know how to change that, so I'm going to keep using anyway, because it's survival, right? The brain is in survival, constant pleasure sense, and this is what's happening. And that would make sense, wouldn't it? Because most people will say, well, if you love me, you'd stop. And it's like, well, of course I love you. So no love could even stop that for someone. So that tells you there's something more going on, and that the overriding obsessive thought to change the way that we feel. So yes, there will be people in denial, there will be people fully aware, but that can continue the shame and continue that. But it can also be the catalyst that creates a solution and says, actually, do you know what? This is madness. The whole family are in it. Everyone's feeling it. I've got to change, because this is not who I am.
My experience has been a bit of sheepishness for a day or two, and then it's like it never happened. I did, as you know, put the word out there on social media asking people to share any stories that they had in terms of their mental health when it comes to watching a loved one go through some kind of addiction. Let me see. Here we go. I'm going to just read out a few. My boyfriend has struggled with porn addiction in the past, and it was something hard not to take personally and get down on myself for not being good enough, hot enough, sexual enough.
Powerful.
Yeah.
And really common.
Really common. Yeah.
What the person's response to what they're writing there is quite a common statement. Please continue.
Deny, deny, deny. I found empty wine bottles in the car behind the bath. There's always an explanation or hard deflection. If we didn't have kids, I'd have left the marriage by now, but I'm too scared for their welfare if I walk. My wife won't admit she has a problem. I feel stuck, helpless, and incredibly frustrated. I'm now single, no kids, and just spent over 2 years trying to help my older boyfriend. Drugs leave the person ungrateful, selfish, without empathy. You get no thanks trying to help an addict. You just waste your life and lose your sanity and happiness. The partners are always left feeling second best to a drug. Yeah.
Wow. That's really hard hitting, isn't it?
Yeah. And then this one is, being in love with an addict is time consuming, mentally draining, and physically exhausting. I used to think that I could handle anything, but it was dating an addict which really pushed me to the brink. My advice for someone who loves an addict is that you have to do your best to support them, but that support can't be unconditional. At some point, you do have to think of your own needs, feelings, and goals.
Absolutely bang on. That's correct. And it's easier said than done, but it's true. It's like the boundary, because big part of addiction is manipulation. So if we're enabling the behavior, and we're going to, every time I cry, I get the bottle of milk. Well, I'm going to keep crying because I'm going to get the bottle of milk. So cry, 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 milk, 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 cry, cry, more crying, more milk. So, the manipulation, the enabling, can I have this money? I need this. Can I borrow? Yep. Well, because if I don't do that, they're going to go out there and I don't know what else to do. Tough love. You would have heard that talked about, but boundaries, I just say boundaries. And what those boundaries look like is, what are the boundaries in the relationship, but what is also your self-boundary? So next time this happens, I'm off. How many people might be listening have ever said that and given them the ultimatum, but stuck with it, sometimes. And then, the person that's really in addiction might say, well, They're never going to leave. They're not going to go until they actually go. And then sometimes they might, go forward and think, I need to get the help. So it's about the boundary. It's about looking at where is your line, because it's like, it's one thing to watch somebody go down and that pain, and you're powerless to do anything about it, to change it for them with all the will in the world. But then there's another thing if you go down too. And so there has to come that line. And sometimes we have to detach with love. It's a hard choice to make, and it's an individual choice to make. When you talked about the porn addiction there, and my heart goes out straight away, that person interprets as, I mustn't be enough. Maybe I'm not sexy enough. Maybe it's like, number one, because I'm also a sex addiction therapist and porn addiction therapist and compulsive behavior. It's nothing to do with you. So whoever wrote that in, it is absolutely nothing to do with you. It is not your fault that he has or she has that addiction. It has no bearing on whether you're sexy enough. And when you look at what, porn and sex addiction is, most people, in fact, most regular people I'd have around like a dinner table might say, oh, that'd be a good addiction to have. And I think, no, actually, it's one of the loneliest and shameful addictions to have, actually, because it's not about the amount of sex that you have. It's not about the amount of porn. Some people use sex to avoid intimacy. Yeah. Some people, why are we using porn in the first place? Is it because we're feeling less than and we've got some anxiety around sex itself? Is it because we have been shamed in some way and therefore porn will never let me down? Is it that we're curious and inquisitive? Is it changing and give us that temporary fix and changing the way that we feel because we can't communicate how we're really feeling? Are we feeling lonely? Loads of different things. And when we're looking at the dopamine release with porn, it's very instant release of dopamine, which is not how sex works. Some people find an increase in porn because they find that sex is leaving them flat. Well, that's because you're releasing dopamine in such an instant way. Like white pasta is quick releasing in energy. And actually sex is like your brown pasta, slower releasing in energy, slower releasing in dopamine. It builds over time. I did a post not long ago called Porn and Pasta, just to give that exact analogy, right? And I find people can take that a bit more. I mean, you smiled there because you knew exactly where I was going with that and made sense to you. And that's how our brain works. But with porn, again, it's with sex and porn addiction, it's attachment, trauma, or opportunity. It's really digging deep around that. Hiding the alcohol, the second person you talked about, hiding the alcohol and hiding the bottles. Well, again, we're exposing what they already know. They know. Of course, they'll know that they've got the issue, but you're exposing it. And that makes me feel even worse. And now it means I've got to face it. And I don't know if I can face it. Leave me alone. And maybe if I don't acknowledge it, it's not really happening because I can't believe it. I've gone from that to this suddenly. It's very exposing. None of us like our flaws to be exposed, right? If I found out your flaws, you wouldn't like me to expose those flaws to the world or anyone else, or to yourself sometimes if you're not in fully acceptance of those flaws, right?
But surely you can't turn a blind eye.
No, but for some, it's not that easy, right? For some, it's just not that easy. And again, it depends on the situation. And I say that a lot. I've said this a lot in this interview because I've met so many people from all different walks of life, all different careers. Addiction doesn't care what color you are, what weight you are, what class you're in, what job you have. It will get you. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. And so therefore, the more diverse cultures, backgrounds, classes, there's going to be more stories and more avenues. There are people who would use because they weren't loved enough. There were people who were loved more than enough, but interpreted they're not enough. And they're even more shaming. So it will get you in other angles. So everyone's story is different.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? If somebody's using because they think they're not enough, but then the byproduct of that is that's probably how their partner's going to feel, like we heard in one of the examples.
Absolutely.
But I'm conscious of your time, and I just want to make sure we get in some sort of takeaways for people that are listening to this that do have somebody they care about that's struggling with addiction. And I wanted to go back to talking about enabling. This is from 12keysrehab.com. The blog post was getting inside the mind of an addict, and I thought this was an interesting paragraph. Enabling is one of the most common mistakes people living with addicts make. Most loved ones of addicts don't even realise they're doing it. Enabling an addict means you're keeping your loved one in the cycle of addiction by not letting them suffer the consequences of their behaviours. It's easy to confuse enabling with caring. Enabling may come in the form of caretaker, excuse maker, and fixer. It can feel like you're helping your loved one, but if they never experience the consequence of their actions, what motivation do they have to get better? I think if it's a parent and it's their kid that's got the addiction, saying no, I think, could be extremely hard. If I don't let them crash here, are they going to go on the streets? You know, if I don't give them this money, are they going to steal it instead?
So hard. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's so hard. There's no quick answer. There is no quick answer. It's easy for all of us to have an opinion and say, until we're faced with that situation, until we're really in that position, you won't really know. As I said, detaching with love, it's a statement that needs consideration. It's a real painful place to be. But yes, you know, we are not contributing to that person's behavior. They are doing what they're doing because of how they're interpreting the world and themselves in that world. And all we're doing is, in that example, is we are continuing the permission for that behavior to continue. Because don't forget, when it's looking at addiction, they're not bad people. It's unwell people at that time. And so what that means is judgment is clouded. It's hard to see if you're a loved one and there's not been a success there to get that compassion in. But actually, with someone that's in the depths of addiction, all that matters is the finding and getting more to change the way that we feel. So all that unacceptable becomes acceptable, because the getting and using, getting and drinking, acting out, that's the overriding obsessive thought to change the way that we feel, because there's that inability to regulate emotion the right way and communicate how we're feeling or really move forward in their life without this, because this is the coping mechanism that's now destructive. So now the coping mechanism has become a destructive mechanism, and I don't know what else to do. So the cycle keeps continuing, because now there's the shame, there's the guilt, there's the remorse. And so what we do, we don't want to feel that. We keep pushing that down, and we don't know how we feel until we're numb. So it's very complicated, and sometimes it can be very easy to judge that, but that can be motivated by the pain that one is feeling that they've experienced, you know, and that intolerance that they've felt, the amount that they've taken. And for a lot of people within addiction, there is a lot of manipulation involved in that. And so a loved one, if they feel that, it's going to be very hard for them to get the compassion. And if they go to a different relationship and see the signs again in someone else, sometimes it's like, no, been here before, not having that. You know, it's really hard.
Absolutely. What you were saying as well about the boundaries, and this is taken from the same article. Boundaries say, I love you, but I won't aid in your addiction. Healthy boundaries often include not making excuses for your addicted loved one to friends and family when they mess up, not letting your loved one to be in the house or attend family gatherings if they're drunk or high, stop bailing them out if they get into legal or financial trouble, not letting addict behaviour interfere with your self-care, social activities, job and other responsibilities. And then they go on to talk about remembering the needs of the rest of your family, because I do think as well, the focus can all go towards the person that is granted, you know, tormented with this addiction, but then that suddenly becomes the family, isn't it? It's all, everybody is connected to this situation.
Absolutely. As I said in the beginning, it's like paint stripper, it rips through families. It's never just that individual. And obviously that person that's given some really good, useful tips, you know, not all of those I might necessarily agree with, but that's okay. That's the person, that's their experience. That's clearly come from an experiential place that they've found for them, for their own sanity. That was what they had to adopt. And I think there'll be many people listening thinking, that's a really good idea, but how do you do that? And it's like, well, it's that leap of faith. It's really that leap of faith. And it's the same way of someone getting clean. It's like, well, how do you do that? It's that leap of faith, trust the process. We've all got to go through that new stage at some point. But when you've had enough's enough. So that person that's given those tips clearly had enough, couldn't go down, and felt like, well, hold on, this needs to change. I need to change. And, you know, quite often with recovering addicts, they do this because it's a program of looking at themselves. If they go down a particular route, a program to look at themselves. And then quite often the families who've been feeling that will keep pointing the finger at them, but actually we need to point back at ourselves too and think, right, I need to look after myself, and what about my self-care? What about my behavior? Because I've got enmeshed in that behavior, and it's bringing out a side of me that I don't like. And so I need to find out who I am again, and I need to reestablish, because I'm a human being, you know? So it is a journey.
Yeah, and it's the hardest thing, isn't it? Because, like you said, there's no right or wrong answer, I suppose. But I think about like Christmas Day, and imagine you've got to make that decision whether you invite somebody for like the Christmas dinner. It's like, does everybody else have to be on tenterhooks because they're not sure in terms of the person's behavior, if they've got some, addiction, or just feeling like crap knowing that that loved one isn't round the table with everybody else? Nobody wins, do they?
Nobody wins, and that's exactly right. You've seen it, and all of those are very real examples, aren't they? That's exactly what happens. There are people that just watch it unfold, and the mess and the chaos and the carnage, and then remember that forever, or they exclude them from that and say, actually, no, I'm not having that. You can't be around that, and then it's that sadness. It's all down to the family. It's all down to the individual. Of course, in an ideal world, those boundaries are really important. What we'd love to say is, excuse me, that behavior is not acceptable. I'd rather you didn't do that. Okay, I'll go and get some help. It's just not reality. It is for some people. But you know what? You're absolutely right. I need to get on this. And that's fine too. So that's why I'm very careful that I never give the top tips, if you like, and tell you how it should be, because everyone is different. Every family unit is different. There are people who, as you say, I can't kick them out on the street because I know who they're friends with, and I know they'll be in a crack den before 11 p.m. and I'll never see them again. For others, they might not be in that particular sort of circle, and they'll say, well, that's okay. I'll pay for them to be in a flat, so I haven't got to see it. And they'll be somewhere else. Someone might have a bit more of financial freedom. It's all very, very different. But ultimately, it's those boundaries. If they're crossing those boundaries, making your life hell at home, and for others, we need to hold a hand and say, actually, this is not acceptable behavior, and we need to look at what detaching of love looks like. And I promise you, there is lots of self-help groups for loved ones and families. Most rehabs promote them anyway, but like Families Anonymous, NACOA, which is adult child of alcoholics, Al-Anon, Alateen, impact programs for families and carers. There's so many different things out there. Alcohol Change UK, all these kind of things, and things such as the Priory and other private treatment centres. They have them at that disposal. You can get information. You can look online, addiction treatment online on Google, and you can speak to these lines, and they'll be able to give you some information for families. But ultimately, I've seen the best freedom when the families, individuals, work a program of sorts themselves, look at themselves, and get a program for living in their own mind. I know I said program a lot, but the 12-step program, not really talked about it, but the 12-step program, I'm a big fan of. Linda McCartney was not an alcoholic or an addict. She said, if regular folk followed the 12-step program, we'd all be better people, because it's a program looking at ourselves. And I thought that made so much sense. It's really looking at your own behavior, because we're powerless over people, places, and things. I can't change you. Whatever viewpoint you've got today, I can't change that. I'm powerless over that. But I can make my life unmanageable if I keep trying to change your mind. I've got to accept you're entitled to your viewpoint. And so we have to look at trusting the process, ask for help, really look at our own behavior. And that's really, really important. So there is plenty of support out there, really.
Okay, and I'm going to take this moment now, Taner, to ask you, why have you devoted so much of your life's work helping those who suffer addiction, or those who have a loved one suffering addiction?
Well, I never really thought this would be my line of work, if I'm honest.
Okay.
I was always performing on stage, and music and drama, and I've worked every job you can possibly imagine, and nightclub industry, sales environments. But unfortunately, I have my own journey of mental health and addiction. And, I'm delighted to sit here and tell you I'm nearly 17 years clean. And it's the best I've ever felt in my entire life. And I had no idea when I got clean what I'd be doing, but I just fell into it. I fell into giving out leaflets for school kids on the Talk to Frank bus for the drug awareness program. And I met youth workers, and I wanted to know more. And then I went and volunteered, and then I worked in the drug service, and they took a chance on someone who had no qualification in his field, but was a bit off the wall and had his own personal experience, had no boundaries, and, self-disclosing all the time. And I had to learn, and people gave me their time. They could see I had something, which was great. And then I sort of become teachable, and And I absolutely love it. And I'm not saying you have to be in the same position, because no one knows what it's like to be you but you. And this is just for me, and everyone's preference is different. If I am going to go and see a lost counselor because I've lost a dog or a loved one or loss of a job, I kind of want to know, for me, that that therapist knows what the feeling of loss feels like. And not everyone needs to feel that way, but I find that my own experience, I don't make it about me at all, but I find that it's such a heavy, toxic, draining field, addiction. It's not for everyone, I get that, but usually people work in it because they're affected by it directly or indirectly. That's been my experience, and I know what being in that hell is like, and wanting to die and not wanting to live anymore and contemplating it and shaming the family and all of this stuff. And so, but I also know what it looks like on the other side. So I have that belief that it can get better, no matter what, whether it's addiction or anything. As human beings, we can improve and better a quality of our life and reach our fullest potential. And I want to be a part of that journey, and I love it.
What was the catalyst for you to get help?
Um,
When did you decide enough is enough?
Yeah, I didn't. That's the point. You know, when you mentioned earlier on when they're ready, I weren't ready. I was forced to. I was 24 years old. My parents had went and seen someone professionally, and I ticked all the boxes. And they gave me a mini intervention and challenged me in the kitchen. And it was basically shape up or ship out, because we can't go down with you. You know, all the lying, all the deceit, this anger, this resentment you've got. It's intolerable. So shape up or ship out. My dad wanted to lash out. He didn't know what to do. He got, very upset. My mum's like, we need to play this right, because otherwise he'll use this as an excuse to go off and do even worse things. So we need to tackle this in the right way with love, but let him know that his behavior is unacceptable. And so I went and got the help, and I wanted the consequences to stop. I didn't really want to stop using and drinking, but I wanted the consequences to stop. And of course, the more I went and engaged in the helping programs that I went to, the more I started to hear stories, and the more hope I got, and the more belief I thought, well, maybe it can get better. And and a day become a day, and that was the catalyst, really. And I messed about for about 6 months, and I've continued on that journey ever since. And as a result, I've become a productive member of society, Gabby. It's mental, really.
Wow.
I'm a dad. I've got an 8-year-old daughter, never seen me drink. I got a wife, married nearly 11 years, she'd never seen me drink.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. But it's a real pleasure to live. I get to live and learn how to live, and that destructive mechanisms aren't the way forward. And I just love facilitating possibility change for anybody, whether it be a partner, addiction, anxiety, anything. We all need each other. We all need to connect, and we all fall off that way sometimes. We're human beings, man. Like, we're all gonna mess up. We're all gonna feel it's hopeless at one point, and it's just that human helping another human. And that sounds so cliche and cheesy when I say it, but that's my belief. Because otherwise I'll get into the politics and this one, what's going on in that world and that country. Forget that. Just this right now, what we're doing, the connecting, the connection, that's really key. And giving that person that space to be non-judged and be able to go, here, blur, this is what's going on for me. I'm not there to fix it. I'm there to listen and help you be your own scientist. That's my job. And I love being a part of that.
Amazing. Wow. Final question. I ask every guest to set the listeners some homework based on the theme of the episode.
Okay.
So in this case, what is a simple, actionable first step that we can take when it comes to loving an addict whilst looking after ourselves that will help us on our mission to building a happier life?
I think outing the behavior. I think it's 100%. If that's your loved one, call it out, but not in a shameful way. Because sometimes some people might think, I'm going mad, I'm going crazy, I'm sure there's something going on there. And then no. We do it all the time, especially love. Love is blind, so we ignore the red flags because we want that love, right? So the red flags go. And it's not until afterwards you think, oh, do you know what? Those flags were there, but because of the love. So I think, really, if you think there's something wrong, there probably is. So name it, but do it with love and compassion. Love and compassion, love and compassion. Have that conversation. What's going on for you? I'm here. Share how you're feeling. Well, when you do this, I feel this way. And give them that opportunity. So you're doing everything you can. And so even if all that you do and it doesn't work, that if you do decide to leave that relationship or you go another way, you've done everything you can. But I think having that conversation, because there will be people listening that are in like that intervention I had with my parents. I knew deep down I needed to be found out. I didn't have the courage. I was too shameful to go, Dad, Mum, I'm in it. But they knew, I knew, but no one said anything until they said something. And do you know what? I was so relieved I didn't have to live a double life anymore. Thank you for outing it. I needed that extra nudge, and there they were, never to disappoint. And so that might also be another thing. So bring it to the forefront, bring it to the attention, see what happens. You might get, you're right, love, this is what's happening. But at least start that conversation and share how you feel. Even if you don't feel you're able to tell me, loved one, this is how I'm feeling at your behavior. This is what it's like to live with you. This is what it's like to receive you. We often ask clients that when I work with clients, what's it like for your family to receive you? Oh, powerful question. Ask a client that. What's it like for your family to receive you in your behavior? Get them really thinking. So share how you're feeling, how you feel their behavior impacts you, but speak from the I. That's what I would always suggest. Name it. We can't be classically British and hold it in the head and say nothing. That person pushed in the queue will say nothing, right? We've got to own it. If they're your loved one, why wouldn't you own it? Absolutely. You'd share it. You'd say what's on your mind, share what's on your mind. That's what I would say. It's hard, I know, but that's one of the bravest steps you can make, because you never know.
Oh, Taner, thank you so much. So for more on you, people can head to your website, which is Taner, what's it, a minus sign? Hyphen, yeah. Thank you. Hassan, HASSAN.com, and you're on the gram under Taner Therapy.
I am.
We'll put that in the show notes as well.
Thank you very much. Really lovely to talk to you.
Thank you again to the wonderful Taner Hassan, and thank you to you for listening to this episode of the Happier Life Project with me, Gabby Sanderson. Now for the important housekeeping. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download. You can access all of its content, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is me, and the interviewees. The content of this podcast should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. The Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. Thank you for all the recent reviews. We really, really appreciate it. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. And if you do get a chance to give us some feedback, it always goes very much appreciated. And to find and follow us on social media, if you're not already there, we are at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Please do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.